What's the deal with loneliness?
Loneliness is widespread in the Western world. Sociologists have found that 10 to 15% of Americans will likely die alone, and that number will continue to increase over the coming decades. In numerous surveys in both the US and Europe, anywhere from 30 to 60% of the population self-reports feeling lonely or say that they have no meaningful in-person interactions on a daily basis. What's more surprising is that younger people often report experiencing more loneliness than older people. Let's just put it out there. Loneliness is bad for you. There's a famous stat that gets bandied about claiming loneliness shortens your lifespan as much as smoking 15 cigarettes per day. I always think it's pretty ridiculous how they calculate these factoids, but the point remains, loneliness is unhealthy, both physically and mentally. It raises the risk of anxiety and depression. It also harms your physical health. Studies find that people who are lonely experience more heart disease, higher blood pressure, and weaker immune systems. You could say the world is more connected than it's ever been before. Friends, family, and strangers who live miles apart can communicate instantly thanks to the power of social media and the internet. And yet, why do so many of us still feel lonely? Researchers claim that the US is currently experiencing a loneliness epidemic, particularly in the midst of social isolation experienced during the prolonged COVID-19 pandemic. In fact, a 2021 study found that more than half of American adults, approximately 58%, are considered lonely by clinical standards. Furthermore, loneliness is closely linked with overall mental health. Adults with mental health issues are more than twice as likely to feel lonely and experience side effects as those with strong mental health. Doctors have also found that people who are lonely tend to have increased blood pressure, weaker immune systems, and more inflammation throughout the body. Turns out, connectedness with other people is vital for our own survival.
What we don't know about loneliness.
So that sounds pretty bad. But wait, it gets worse. There's still much we don't understand about loneliness.
Why this is happening?
Loneliness afflicts the Western world in a way that it doesn't appear to affect other cultures. There are many theories for why this is, but we still don't have any solid answers. Some point to Westerners' more individualistic culture with less emphasis on family or community. Some blame urbanization and cultural norms around owning your own house, living alone, working independently, etc. Some point to demographic changes. People are having fewer children, moving from city to city more often, and spending less time with the elderly. Some point to the decline in religiosity, arguing that religion has historically been the core of human community and camaraderie. It could be any or all of these.
How to fix it?
Again, there are a lot of theories, but we know little for sure. Connections online and through devices seem to be poor replacements for the emotional and psychological sustenance we get from being around others. Social media and video games are like the diet soda of our emotional well-being. It tastes like we're hanging out with people, but there are no emotional calories. And in this case, no emotional calories is a bad thing. It's starving us. Loneliness is both a function of quality and quantity of social interactions. Not only do we need to see people we know often, but we also need to feel some degree of intimacy and trust with those we know. That said, efforts are being made. In 2018, the UK appointed a Minister of Loneliness. Scandinavian countries such as Denmark are having success with co-housing policies where a mixture of elderly, retired people and young families in need of childcare are matched into housing units where they share living spaces and support each other. But overall, this appears to be a big issue. It's an issue to the point where the medical world has taken notice and pharmaceutical companies are even questioning if they could develop a drug to treat loneliness in the same way there are pills to treat depression. So, other than being emotionally painful, loneliness can impact people in many ways.
Depression.
A 2021 study published in Lancet Psychiatry found associations between loneliness and depressive symptoms in a group of adults 50 years old and older. Research also suggests that loneliness and depression may feed off of and perpetuate each other.
Physical health.
Several studies have linked emotional stress with depressed immunity. Other research links loneliness and depression with poorer health and well-being. Therefore, people who are experiencing loneliness are susceptible to a variety of health issues.
Physical pain.
Research shows that the areas of the brain that deal with social exclusion are the same areas that process physical pain. Adding a scientific explanation to the oft-romanticized experience of a broken heart.
The dark path from loneliness.
But this still doesn't get at why I think loneliness is the low-key root of so many social and cultural issues today. Biologically speaking, we're social animals. We are evolved to live in groups and rely upon one another physically. Therefore, we've evolved to rely upon one another emotionally as well. Much of the meaning and purpose we derive in life comes via our relationships with other individuals or from our perceived role within society at large. In fact, it appears that our need for human connection is so strong that much of our ability to form functional beliefs about ourselves and the world is tied to our relationships. Like a muscle, you lose empathy if you don't use it. And this is why, when people look at what motivates religious fanatics, conspiracy nuts, and political extremists, time and time again, what they find is abiding loneliness. Rejection and social isolation radicalize people. In the absence of affection and understanding, people fall back onto delusional ideas of revolution and saving the world to give themselves a sense of purpose. Hannah Arendt, the mid-20th century philosopher and writer, was a German Jew who successfully escaped the Nazis. After the war, she spent years studying totalitarianism, the rise and fall of fascism, the communist revolutions, the horrors of Stalin and Hitler and Mussolini and Mao, and more importantly, why these leaders became so popular so quickly among their followers despite the terror they invoked. She then produced a classic book called The Origins of Totalitarianism. The book stretches nearly 500 pages, and in the end, she comes to a startling conclusion. She argued that loneliness makes people susceptible to the contempt and fragmentation that causes functional societies to collapse into extremism and violence. She wrote, "Loneliness, the common ground for terror, the essence of totalitarian government, the preparation of its executioners and its victims, is closely connected with uprootedness and meaninglessness, which have been the curse of modern masses since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution and have become acute with the rise of the imperialism at the end of the last century and the breakdown of political institutions and social traditions in our own time. What prepares men for totalitarian domination in the non-totalitarian world is the fact that loneliness, once a borderline experience usually suffered in certain marginal social conditions like old age, has become an everyday experience of the ever-growing masses of our century. The merciless process into which totalitarianism drives and organizes the masses looks like a suicidal escape from this reality. The reasoning which seizes you as in a vice appears like a last support in a world where nobody is reliable and nothing can be relied upon. It is the inner coercion whose only content is the strict avoidance of contradiction that seems to confirm a man's identity outside the relationships with others. Basically, once cut off from empathetic social contact to ground us, the only way we make sense of the world is by adopting radical all-or-nothing views. And within these views, people begin to see a need for radical overthrow of the status quo. They begin to imagine themselves complete victims or destined saviors of society. Keep in mind, too, that she wrote this in 1951, long before Trump and woke leftists and Twitter were thought to have ruined everything, and perhaps this is the real threat of social media. It does not necessarily make us lonelier or angrier, or more selfish or more spiteful. It simply enables the lonely and angry and selfish and spiteful to self-organize and be heard like never before. And what do all humans who have similar yet strange beliefs do when they get together? That's right, they convince themselves that they're going to save the world with their knowledge. That is, they go on a crusade. And you and I and everyone else has to listen to them, emboldened and invigorated by their new internet friends as they explain to us. Perhaps another way to look at Arendt's argument is that we run the risk of extremists taking over when it becomes easier for radicals with fringe beliefs to mobilize and organize than the moderate majority. Historically, this mobilization of the extremes was enabled by economic depressions and famines and, pandemics and whatnot. Today, perhaps social media and smartphones have inadvertently made that mobilization more possible, but who knows? The fact is, we still don't know enough to say for sure.
Make sure to watch the following parts for a great collection of tips on the ways to feel less lonely.